If you're an actor and you've ever felt lost in your head, lost in your process, lost in relation to working out a character, then there is a map that can help you, a real psychological map. It's called the ACT Matrix, and today in this video, I'm going to show you the first steps in how to use it. The ACT Matrix is one of the most powerful tools in contemporary behavioral psychology. It helps you to make sense of what you're thinking and feeling, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what else might be possible. And the real magic is the exact same map works for you and works for your characters. And the starting point for it is that it offers a perspective, a point of view on human behavior. And here's what that looks like. So here's my scruffy version here on this whiteboard, and you can see it's a really simple diagram. 2 lines, and up here it says senses, and down here it says mind, and over here it says towards, and over here it says away. And I could give you a little lecture on this diagram and why it's the way it is, but really this is a tool. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it in relation to my own experience, and hopefully that will give you a sense of how it works and we can take it from there. So how I start with this is I put my attention here in the lower right quadrant of the diagram, and I write some stuff in here in response to a question. And the question we use to get the ball rolling is, who is important to you? So it's a simple question and it has some simple answers. I have 2 children, they're important to me, so I can write them in here. I have a partner, she's important to me, so I can write her in there. And I can continue with this, right? There are more people that are important to me that go beyond this, family, friends, and so on. So I can start to fill this out more. And as I continue with that, who might start to transform into what's important to me, maybe acting is important to me, maybe my house is important to me, and so on, until we dig down to something that we talk about in this framework called ACT as values. So these bigger principles, the things that make life meaningful for me from my perspective. So I might get to creativity or compassion or justice or something like that, right? And we don't start there. We start with who, because who's easy, right? I don't need to stop and think for too long to tell you that my kids are important to me. If we start with what are your values in life, we all tend to get a little bit heady. So we start with who and we expand from there. But this is the principle. Who and what's important goes in this lower right box down here. Now we can shift our attention over here to the lower left box, and the technical term for what goes in here is yucky stuff. Sometimes as you go about your life as a human being, yucky or aversive stuff shows up inside you. Stuff shows up and it's like you've put your hand in something disgusting, right? And it's yuck. You just want to pull your hand away and get away from it, get rid of it. And so we might put something in here like fear. And you can see I've started to add to that. I've got fear, I've got anxiety, I've got shame, naming some big feelings, but I might expand that into cognitions, thoughts, language that appears in my head. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough. Maybe no one will like this video about the Matrix that I'm making now, right? Things that my mind says to me that feel yucky or aversive when they show up. And that could go into images, memories, sensations, right? But again, the principle is very simple. If it's yucky or aversive stuff that shows up inside, it goes down here in the lower left. So if we've got that, we can now start to look up here at the upper left. And what goes in here are observable behaviours. So things you could actually see me do, or things I could capture on camera if I had this around all the time. And it's observable behaviours, things that I do to move away from this yucky or aversive stuff when it shows up. So I started with fear, And perhaps when fear shows up, something I might do to move away from that fear, to escape from it, is I might run away. So here we have me running away to escape from my fear, but I might do other things. Maybe I'd hide, or maybe I'd try and fight whatever the thing was that was frightening me. And there are lots of other things. We call these away moves for obvious reasons, right? They're behaviors that move us away from stuff. And so anxiety might show up and I might do something small. I might get my phone out and start scrolling as a way of avoiding or escaping the anxiety that I'm experiencing in that particular moment. Or I might do something bigger, like stop showing up to see people in social situations, right? As a way of keeping myself protected from anxiety that I might feel in those social situations. So anything I'm doing that is about moving away from what I find yucky or aversive, that goes up here in the upper left. Then we come over here to the upper right, and this is also about observable behaviors, but these are the observable behaviors, the things that I do to move towards who and what's important to me. So I started by saying my kids are important to me, and there are lots of things I might do to move towards my children and towards that relationship as being important to me. So I might, for instance, make time to play with my children. And then there are more things I might do to move towards my children being important to me. I might clothe them, feed them, spend time with them, take them to school, right? I'm doing this very, very briefly now, but you can see how we can start to fill all of these quadrants out. And then the further invitation here is to notice this stuff. So the idea is, this is my matrix, and so I am the person best able to occupy this space in the middle here and to notice what's going on with all of this stuff, to notice who and what's important to me in my life or in my work, notice what's showing up for me that I find difficult or aversive or yucky, notice what I'm doing to move away from the yucky stuff, and notice what I'm doing to move towards the important stuff. And if you fill this out for yourself, and I'd encourage you to watch the end of the video, then maybe scroll back and try this for yourself. Just draw your attention to what might be in these boxes for you in this particular moment, in this particular context, and then extend that invitation to notice a bit of this stuff. So you might think, will I have the opportunity over maybe the next week or so to notice what shows up for me? And then you take that invitation and you see what happens. You see, maybe you notice lots of stuff over the course of that week. Maybe you don't notice anything. And it's fine. You're just extending that invitation to notice. Now, the idea with this, within ACT, which is the psychological model that this comes from, ACT stands for acceptance and commitment therapy when it's used in a therapy setting, acceptance and commitment training when it's used more generally, more broadly. And the idea within ACT is that what we want in life is to be flexible, to have what's called psychological flexibility. And in relation to this, that means that we move about this diagram with what's showing up, how we're responding to it, in a way that is flexible and in a way that works for us in terms of how we want to live our lives. The issue being that many of us, much of the time in our lives as human beings, are not very psychologically flexible. We become psychologically rigid or stuck, and this diagram helps us to make sense of that when it happens. So let's start with a really simple, familiar for me at least, example of stuckness in everyday life, and think about what happens when I get caught up, when I get stuck in procrastination. So I've tried to draw this out really simply for the purposes of this video. And what I'm thinking of is that, let's say I'm meaning to make this video, right? Meaning to make this video and put it on YouTube. And I'm experiencing some anxiety about it. I'm a bit worried about, will I make a good video? Maybe it will be rubbish. Maybe no one will like it and all of that, right? So when that anxiety shows up, I do something else as a way of getting away from that anxiety, right? I feel anxious. Let's go and make a cup of tea, or, find a household chore to do, or text someone, or whatever it might be, right? And so that's my away move. And in itself, that's fine. What gets me stuck is that I feel anxious. I scroll on my phone a bit. I do something else. But it doesn't work for very long, right? I feel my anxiety goes down, but then I do something else and I come back to the idea that I'm meant to be making this video, and I still feel anxious. In fact, maybe I feel more anxious. And so I do something else again, and then that feeds back. And then I do something else and it feeds back. And this is a classic stuck loop, right? And admittedly, this is a stuck loop that in relation to the universe is probably not that important, maybe, of whether I make this video or not. But this same pattern of avoidance and going round and round and staying unable to connect with what really matters to you is a pattern that we see play out on different scales all the time in our own lives, in the lives of people around us, and importantly, in the lives of the characters we want to play as actors. So let's think really briefly about how we can use this map, this thing called the act matrix, in relation to a couple of characters that I hope you may be familiar with. The first is a character called Hamlet from Shakespeare's Hamlet, and the second is a character called Ariel from Disney's The Little Mermaid. I'm thinking about Hamlet in his first scene, when we first meet him in the play. And for context, his father has died fairly recently, and his mother has married his uncle. And we can start to think about what goes where for Hamlet in terms of the matrix. So we can start in the same way and start in that lower right quadrant, and we can learn from the scene and from the text some things that seem to be important to him. I mean, his dad seems to be important to him, his mum seems to be important to him, and we might get some things around values, things like honour, loyalty, nobility, and so on. We can then turn our attention to the lower left, and as we'll find is often the case with Hamlet, there's quite a lot of yucky stuff, aversive mental content that is showing up for him. There's a lot of grief there. There is a lot of disgust. So what does Hamlet do in the upper left? What does he do to move away from these difficult, uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that he's experiencing? Well, in the scene, we see him being sarcastic, kind of isolating himself, withdrawing, distancing himself from those around him. The question then is, what does Hamlet do to move towards who and what's important to him? And there's a lot to say here, but what I want to highlight very quickly in this short video is that this is the whole question. How do I move towards any of this stuff in these circumstances? I can't find a route to feel like I'm connecting to who and what's important and making meaningful moves towards that. And so we find Hamlet stuck over on that left-hand side in one of these stuck loops, getting all caught and tangled up in his difficult thoughts and feelings, trying to do something to escape from them and avoid them, and ending up going round and round in this stuck cycle. Now, in terms of Ariel from The Little Mermaid, I'm thinking about the early part of the story when there she is in the ocean, looking up, longing to be part of that world. And in the lower right, we might put things like agency, love, connection, discovery. And then we can turn our attention to the lower left and say what's showing up for her in this context that is yucky or difficult. And we might say things about her feeling trapped, about her feeling frustrated by the way she's treated by her father, particularly by her family. So what does she do to move away from that stuff when it shows up? Well, what we see in that early part of the film is her doing a lot of daydreaming. And again, we come to the question, well, what is she doing to move towards these things that are important to her? And we might notice something important and similar between these two apparently very contrasting characters, and say that the same question comes up, that she's there stuck with the question of what can I actually do? I don't seem to be able to do anything because I have, again, going back to that lower left, I have the wrong body, I'm trapped, I don't have the permission to be allowed to do the things that are important to me. And so again, we find a character who is stuck in a cycle, unable to move towards what really matters to them. And maybe this idea of stuckness, this process of identifying these stuck patterns, maybe that is a really crucial part of what it means to understand a character in the first place. Now, what I've been showing you today really are just the very first steps, the baby steps in using the ACT matrix as a tool, because it can help you to develop your own psychological flexibility, help you to notice where you're getting stuck in life and in your work as an actor, and help you to think about different options that are available to you. And it can be a gateway into a much deeper, richer psychological understanding of what's going on with a character. So where do we go from here? Well, if you want to go deeper, I've recently done a full 90-minute workshop on using the ACT matrix as an actor, and that's available now if you go to my website and access the recording there. Also, of course, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, because there'll be lots more on the matrix and on ACT for acting more broadly, which is a new psychological approach to understanding ourselves as actors and understanding the characters we want to interpret.